I used to believe that hospitals were places of safety, places where people came to heal. But some nights, under the hum of flickering lights and the echo of footsteps in empty corridors, I felt something watching me that wasn't alive. Before I begin, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, hit the like button, and leave a comment so you won't miss more stories like this. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because the last part of this story will leave you with chills you won't be able to shake. I've worked as a nurse for over 10 years, mostly on night shifts. People always ask me why I prefer nights, and I usually tell them it's quieter, fewer visitors, fewer doctors, around a calmer environment. But what you don't tell them is that the quiet also leaves room for things you can explain things you rather pretend exists. One particular night has haunted me for years. I was working in the step-down unit, just one floor below the ICU. The unit was dim, lit only by the harsh fluorescent lights that never seemed to stop buzzing. Patients were stable enough not to need intensive care, but too sick to be sent home. It was the kind of place where you constantly hovered between life and death. At around 2 in the morning, I was charting at the nurse's station. The hallway stretched out on both sides, lined with patient rooms. Most of the doors were cracked open, just enough for us to peek inside. The whole floor was so quiet that the sound of my pen scratching against paper seemed unnaturally loud. Then I heard it. The unmistakable squeak of rubber soles sliding slowly across linoleum. At first, I assumed it was another nurse. But when I glanced down the hallway, it was empty. The sound went on for several seconds, drawing closer, before stopping abruptly like someone had frozen mid-step. I felt my stomach tighten. I leaned forward, scanning the hallway again, but there was no one there. Silence and the faint hiss of oxygen machines behind closed doors. I tried to brush it off. Sleep deprivation can play tricks on your mind, and by 2 a.m., I was running on coffee and adrenaline. I forced myself to focus on the chart in front of me, but then I heard it again, this time from the opposite end of the hallway. Slow, dragging steps. A shuffle. Stop. Shuffle again. I stood up, my chair rolling back against the wall. My first thought was that maybe a patient had wandered out of their room, which wasn't uncommon. Some of them would get confused, especially at night. So I grabbed a flashlight and started walking. As I passed each doorway, I peeked in. Every patient was in bed, either sleeping or sedated. Heart monitors beeped steadily, for pumps clicked, and not a single soul was out of place. The footsteps, though they kept moving, just ahead of me. Like whoever it was knew I was following. I reached the end of the hall. Nothing. Just the red glow of an exit sign over a locked stairwell door. I stood there for a moment, listening, my chest tight, and then I heard breathing. It was faint, raspy, and uneven, like someone struggling for air. The sound was coming from directly behind the stairwell door. I froze, my hand hovering over the handle. That door was supposed to stay locked at all times. No patient or staff member should have been in there. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. No response. Just that horrible, labored breathing. Against my better judgment, I slid my keycard through the reader. The lock clicked, and I slowly pushed the door open. The stairwell was pitch black. Normally, a dim emergency light glowed at the bottom, but that night, it was completely dark, like the light had burned out. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the concrete steps, the metal railing, the chipped gray walls. Empty. But the breathing hadn't stopped. It was louder now, echoing up from the shadows below. My chest constricted, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I forced myself to take one step inside, then another. The sound grew harsher, wet and rattling, like lungs filled with fluid. I shined my flashlight down the stairwell. Halfway between the landings, I saw it. A figure hunched against the wall, head drooping forward, shoulders rising and falling with each wheezing breath. "Sir?" I called out, assuming it was a patient. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't respond. I took another step closer, and that's when my flashlight flickered, dimming just enough for me to lose sight of him. When the beam steadied, the space where he had been sitting was empty. My heart stopped. There was no way he could have moved that fast without me hearing it. The stairwell had been filled with echoes just seconds ago, and now nothing. I backed up slowly, my hand shaking so badly I could barely keep the flashlight steady. My whole body screamed to turn and run, but I forced myself to step back through the door and close it behind me. When the latch clicked shut, the breathing stopped. I stood in the hallway, my scrubs clinging to me with cold sweat, trying to process what I'd just experienced. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Down the hallway, just outside one of the patient rooms, a figure was standing. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in what looked like a hospital gown. The fabric hung loose, stained with dark patches. The figure didn't move, didn't shift it, just stood there, head tilted, as though it was studying me. I blinked, and the hallway lights flickered. When they steadied, the figure was gone. I stumbled back into the nurse's station, my chest heaving. I sat down, burying my face in my hands, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But then the call light for room 214 went off. Room 214 was the very room I had just seen the figure standing outside of. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself down the hall. The light above the doorway blinked steadily, and I pushed the door open with a trembling hand. The patient inside, an elderly man on a ventilator, lay motionless in bed. His monitor showed no pulse. He was gone. As I stood there, listening to the flatline, I felt the air in the room shift colder, heavier. And though I was completely alone, I swear I heard that same ragged breathing again, this time just inches behind me. I turned, flashlight raised. Nothing but deep down. I knew whatever I had seen in the stairwell wasn't just in my head, and it hadn't left. That night never left me. I thought maybe it was just exhaustion, or that grief had twisted my mind after losing the patient in room 214. Nurses see death often, but sometimes the timing of it feels almost planned. For weeks afterward, I avoided that stairwell. I avoided even looking toward room 214. But hospitals don't give you much room to hide from your fears. And eventually, something happened that reminded me what I'd experienced wasn't a one-time nightmare. This time, it was in the pediatric wing. Children's units are supposed to feel warm, even cheerful, with murals painted on the walls and stuffed animals tucked into beds. But at night, when the laughter stops and the lights dim, those same cheerful murals start to feel sinister. Smiling cartoon animals become shadows with teeth. The silence isn't comforting, suffocating. I had been floated to the unit to cover a nurse who called out sick. It was after midnight, and most of the kids were finally asleep. Their parents had either gone home to rest or were dozing in recliners by the beds. The only sounds were the soft beeps of heart monitors and the occasional rustle of sheets. Around 1:30 a.m. I was making rounds when I noticed something strange. The motion sensor lights in the hallway kept flickering on, one after another, as if someone was walking slowly past each sensor. At first, I thought it was a doctor making rounds, but when I looked down the hall, I saw no one, just the lights, turning on in sequence, like invisible footsteps triggering them. The last light to flicker was outside room 309. My stomach dropped when I realized that room was empty. No patient, no family, no reason for anyone to be in there. Still, I felt that tug the responsibility to check. Nurses don't get the luxury of ignoring alarms, or footsteps, or even gut feelings. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the pale glow of the moon filtering through half-closed blinds. The bed was neatly made, untouched. A plastic bracelet and a stuffed bear sat abandoned on the nightstand, as if a child had left in a hurry. I was about to leave when I heard it. A soft heagle. It was faint, but unmistakable, Chala's laugh, bubbling up from the shadows near the far corner of the room. "Hello," I whispered, my throat dry. The giggle came again, closer this time, almost playful. I turned on the overhead light, flooding the room in brightness. The corner was empty. The whole room was... I forced a nervous laugh and muttered to myself, "I'm losing it." I turned off the light and started to walk out when the door slammed shut behind me. I froze, my hands still on the knob, hard hammering. I tried to twist it open, but it wouldn't budge, like something was holding it shut from the other side. Then I heard footsteps running across the floor. Small, light, fast. They circled me, the sound darting from one side of the room to the other, too quick for me to track. I spun in place, flashlight beam cutting through empty air, but there was nothing, and then silence. For a few seconds, I thought it was over, but then I felt it. Something tugged at the hem of my scrub pants, just a tiny pull, like a child reaching for attention. Premedijerked bike flashlight aimed down, but no one was there. Just the floor, smooth and sterile. The air grew colder. My breath came out in a faint cloud, something that should have been impossible inside a heated hospital. The stuffed bear on the nightstand toppled over on its own, landing on the floor with a soft thud. And then, clear as day, a child's voice whispered right into my ear. "Play with me." I screamed, fumbling for the door handle again. This time it twisted easily, swinging open so hard it banged against the wall. I bolted into the hallway, my heart slamming against my ribs. The motion sensor lights were all off again, leaving the hall in near darkness. But at the far end, I saw something that nearly brought me to my knees. A small figure stood beneath the exit sign. At first, it looked like a little girl in a hospital gown, her head tilted, long hair hanging in her face. She was holding something in her arms, what looked like the same stuffed bear I had just seen fall. I whispered, "Who's there?" even though I knew I didn't want the answer. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow black voids, and when she opened her mouth, the same playful giggle spilled out but layered with something else. A deeper, rasping undertone that made my skin crawl. The lights flickered, and just like before she vanished, I stood there, frozen, until another nurse rounded the corner, looking at me with confusion. She asked if I was okay, why I looked so pale. I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I? I just saw a ghost child playing in an empty room. No one would believe me. But the next morning, when I was leaving my shift, I overheard two nurses talking near the break room. One of them mentioned room 309. I stopped dead when I heard her say the number. "Did you hear about the little girl who died in there?" One of them whispered. "It was years ago, before they remodeled. They say she still wanders the halls at night." I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, the sound of that giggle echoing in my mind like it had followed me out of the hospital. After that night, I avoided pediatric float shifts as much as I could. I begged to stay on adult floors, even if it meant more codes and heavier work. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. Whatever I had seen wasn't just tied to a single room. It was tied to the hospital itself, and the hospital had more secrets than I ever wanted to know. Because the third time, what I saw wasn't just shadows, or voices, or giggles. It was something far darker. Something that made me question whether I'd ever truly leave that building at all. I thought I'd grown used to the strange things that happen on night shifts, footsteps in empty hallways, shadows where there should be none, the laughter of children long gone. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, or maybe just my imagination trying to make sense of grief. But nothing could have prepared me for the third time. It was a stormy night, the kind where the wind howled against the windows and rain battered the glass like restless fingers. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, followed by deep, rolling thunder. Power flickered across the hospital, plunging us into moments of darkness before the backup generators kicked in. Those seconds of blackness always felt like forever. I was covering the ICU that night. It was busy patients, on ventilators, unstable vitals, alarms going off one after another. But sometime around 3 a.m., things finally settled. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms. Families were asleep in waiting rooms. My coworkers huddled at the nurse's station, sipping lukewarm coffee. That's when the elevator dinged. It startled me, because no one had called for it. At that door, the staff elevators were barely used, and the one that had just opened was at the far end of the ICU wing, half hidden in shadows. I watched the door slide open with a low groan. The inside was pitch black. No light flickered on. No one stepped out. The doors stayed open far longer than they should have, as if waiting for someone or something to leave. I nudged the nurse beside me. "Did you see that?" She looked up, frowned, and shook her head. To her, the elevator looked perfectly normal. She went back to her charting without a second thought. But I couldn't look away. Finally, the door slid shut with a metallic slam, echoing through the quiet ward. A few seconds later, alarms went off to patients coding at once. We ran to their rooms, pulling crash carts, shouting orders. In the chaos, I forgot about the elevator. Until later, after the patients had stabilized, I walked past the end of the hole again. The elevator stood waiting. Doors opened once more. Only this time, the light inside glowed faintly. I stepped closer, against every ounce of instinct. The floor inside looked wrong. Not the smooth linoleum of the hospital, but cracked concrete, stained dark with something that looked too much like blood. And standing in the corner was a figure. It was tall, thin, its body unnaturally bent, head cocked at a sickening angle. Its face was obscured in shadow, but I could feel its gaze drilling into me. The same figure I had seen outside room 214. The same presence I had felt breathing in that stairwell. My breath caught in my throat. My body screamed to run, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor as the figure slowly lifted one long, skeletal hand and curled its fingers toward me, beckoning me inside. Then the door slammed shut. The sudden silence was deafening. I stumbled back, my chest heaving. One of my coworkers asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. How could I explain what I'd just seen? I told myself I was losing my mind. I told myself it wasn't real. But the hospital wasn't done with me yet. Later that shift, I went into a patient's room to check vitals. He was unconscious, sedated, tubes and wires connecting him to machines. I adjusted his four when his eyes snapped open. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I leaned closer, thinking he was trying to speak, and then, in a voice that wasn't his raspy, layered like multiple voices speaking at once, he whispered, "It's coming for you." I staggered back so fast I nearly tripped over the chair. His eyes fluttered shut again, his vitals steady, like nothing had happened. I stood frozen, goosebumps crawling up my arms, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me even then. When my shift finally ended, I practically ran out of the hospital. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick and shining under the early dawn light. I told myself once I was home, once I was away from the smell of antiseptic and the echo of monitors, I'd be fine. But as I walked to my car in the staff lot, I heard it again. That same dragging step. The same shuffle I had heard in the hallway weeks before. He spun around, scanning the lot. Empty. Then a breath raspy, wet, inches from my ear. I jumped, whipping around. No one was there. Just rows of cars glistening with rain. But when I opened my car door and slid inside, I noticed something that froze the blood in my veins. On the passenger seat sat a stuffed bear, the same one from room 309. Its glassy eyes stared up at me, its fur damp, as if it had been left out in the storm. My hands shook as I picked it up and threw it onto the asphalt, slamming my door shut and locking it. I drove away as fast as I could, my heart racing, every nerve screaming that something had followed me. And to this day, I don't know if it ever really left. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm home and the house is quiet, I still hear it. That same dragging step across the floor, that same faint giggle from the shadows, and that same ragged breathing, waiting just behind me. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Do you think what I experienced was just exhaustion, or something darker that clings to hospitals and the people who work there? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what is coming next.